Hey y'all, before we get into today's episode, I want to give you a heads up that we're talking about some sensitive but important topics related to substance use, overdose prevention, and harm reduction. If that's something that's heavy for you right now, feel free to take a pause and come back when you're in a space to listen. Our guest brings incredible insight and heart to this conversation, and we're approaching it with care, compassion, and hopefully a lot of clarity. But we also recognize this is real life and it matters. Thanks for being here and taking care of yourself in the process. This is #Gen Z, a podcast that explores Generation Z, who they are, how they're different from other generations, while also being an incredible blend of those who came before them. We explore what they think is cool, what moves them, and why they do what they do. I'm your host, Meghan Grace. Every week, headlines remind us of the same sobering truth. The overdose crisis in America is still a present threat and largely impacting young adults. In fact, fentanyl is now the leading cause of death by drugs for Americans ages 18 to 45. But what doesn't always make the headlines is that there's hope to address the issue. And the grassroots movements led by young people who are rewriting the script and leading the way on prevention. One of the most powerful shifts we're seeing comes from Gen Z themselves. Multiple studies show that overall substance use among this generation is lower than in past generations at similar ages, yet they've grown up in the shadow of the opioid epidemic, losing friends, classmates, and family members to accidental overdoses. For them, awareness and action are urgent, personal, and necessary. And it also reflects a larger perspective we're seeing around Gen Z related to intentional and informed approaches to life, from work and money to relationships and health. That's why today's conversation matters. We're exploring peer-led education and community action as ways to change the landscape of the overdose prevention epidemic and why young leaders are the forefront of this work. My guest is Maddie Ward, the Chief Operating Officer of End Overdose. Maddie's journey began at UCLA, where she co-founded the first collegiate chapter of the organization. Over 2.5 years, she helped transform a campus initiative into a model that now more than 65 chapters across the country are using. Her leadership has been recognized by the UCLA Chancellor's Service Award, Humanitarian Honors, and the title Bruin Life Senior of the Year. Today, Maddie brings her background in cognitive science and her commitment to service into her national leadership role, scaling initiatives that provide naloxone, fentanyl test strips, and life-saving training directly to young people. There's so much we can learn from Maddie, so let's get into it.
Welcome to the Hire Her podcast, where women in talent call all the shots. We know, another recruiting podcast, just what the industry needs. Okay, but hear us out. You ever spend hours sourcing that perfect candidate, but they end up ghosting you harder than your hinge date? Or finally, you get that hiring manager feedback, only for them to, of course, say, "Can we see more candidates?" Lame, right? But let's talk about what's really lame in the industry. How is it that 65% of recruiters are brilliant women, yet most of the decision makers look like a convention for middle-aged dudes named Brad?
That's where we come in. Hire Her isn't just another podcast about hiring trends you already heard like 50 times this week. We're here to elevate women in talent, share their career journeys, and make sure they take the lead. Because let's face it, if recruiting is the backbone of every company, why are we still fighting for a seat at the table? So whether you're a recruiter, a talent leader, or just someone trying to swim through the sausage fest of TA leadership, we got you, girl. Welcome to Hire Her, the recruiting podcast where women's voices aren't just heard, but they're leading the conversation.
So subscribe now, because middle management Brad sure as hell isn't going to do it for you.
As I always am, I'm just excited to spend time with a new friend and learn alongside them. Today we're getting into what could be, some could see it as a heavy topic, but I think it's still important to talk about. And I'm joined today by Maddie. And Maddie, welcome, and I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And Maddie, tell me a little bit about you. Who are you? You know, it's a deep one. But what is it, the work that you're currently doing, and really what's a journey that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so my current role is I am the COO at End Overdose, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. we're based in Los Angeles, but we do work across the country. And I first got involved with this organization when I was an undergrad at UCLA. I met our CEO and founder, Theo, my sophomore year at UCLA, and I was just ecstatic to hear that there was a program like End Overdose. He was really focused on just equipping as many people as possible with resources like naloxone, which is an opioid overdose reversal medication, and fentanyl test strips, which are used to potentially detect fentanyl and substances before a person uses them. So, kind of a preventative measure against overdose. And those are resources that really were not available to me and my peers on the UCLA campus. And it was something I knew we needed. When I was in high school, I had lost a couple of peers to accidental fentanyl overdoses. So it was definitely something that was on the forefront of my mind when I got to college. And it was really nerve-wracking to see that it wasn't on the forefront of the minds of a lot of my peers, even though they were at risk of overdose in a lot of situations, or witnessing an overdose and not having the resources to respond. So when I met Theo, I was just ecstatic that a program like End Overdose existed, and I really wanted to adapt it for a college audience. So I worked with my UCLA chapter co-founder, Gianna, on adapting a program that we really felt would resonate with UCLA students. And what we found through that was that it not only resonated with our peers, but it resonated with students across the country. And Gianna and I were pretty consistently getting messages from people that we knew, or people who were friends of friends of friends who had seen what we were doing on social media and wanted to implement it on their campuses. So now I kind of help with overseeing the entire End Overdose chapter program, which now spans 69 locations across the country. And seeing that expansion has been really exciting and awesome, but has also really shown me that Gianna and I were right. Like, this is something that resonates and matters a lot to college age students, to young adults. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Just first, I'm so sorry for your loss of losing friends at such a young age. I can't even imagine, but it's amazing how you've channeled that energy to helping other people not experience that. And I always want to give a pat on the back to people that take a situation and try to make it better for others. So if no one's thanked you today, I'm going to do that for doing really important work. And can you tell me, was the UCLA chapter the first collegiate chapter or college-based chapter? So y'all were the first?
Yeah, we were the first college-based chapter.
Casual pioneering done by Maddie. So tell me a little bit more about what End Overdose does, and potentially kind of like how they work specifically with chapters. Because I think some people might hear this and be like, okay, great, but like, what is it that we do to impact this? And then I want to get into some other fun stuff about your leadership journey. But give us the skinny on what End Overdose does in terms of supporting college students and young people and understanding really this important kind of like substance threat that's existing in today's world.
Yeah, so End Overdose definitely kind of takes a multi-pronged approach to our outreach structure. We have online trainings and distributions where people are actually able to take a 30-minute online training, get naloxone or test strips shipped directly to their door. And then we have our in-person efforts as well, which is at music festivals, treatment centers, community events across the country, and also run through our chapters. So the majority of our chapters are based on college campuses. We have some that are based in broader areas as well, but they really just focus on peer-led overdose prevention and response outreach. So not only equipping their peers with the knowledge to be able to respond to overdoses and prevent them, but also the resources. So again, things like naloxone, which is an opioid overdose reversal medication, and test strips, which are used to detect fentanyl or other substances before a person consumes substances. So definitely providing those resources to students, and I think having their peers be the ones educating them on how to use them and why they're important has been so impactful. And what we've really seen is that students are a lot more willing and open to learn about substances or talk about substance use when it's with their peers versus someone who's a lot older than them kind of talking down to them and telling them this is the way that things should be. So that's really the idea behind our whole chapter program.
I can't imagine that you went to UCLA and said, I'm going to go to this school that's like very academically rigorous. So I know you're very smart. And you have a STEM background, but there's this underlying desire for community involvement. And how has your world in STEM and kind of your academic background and your community involvement shaped kind of your sense of leadership as a Gen Z person doing work to directly impact their peers. Tell me about how the science and the STEM of it all got into your community involvement piece as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I started at UCLA actually as a pre-medical student. I was studying psychobiology. I really, really wanted to be a surgeon. That had been my goal in life pretty much since I was like 5 years old. And when I got to UCLA, very quickly realized that that was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I knew I wanted to do something that helped other people. And I loved my major, mainly the psychology aspect of it. So I ended up kind of switching gears and switching majors to cognitive science, which is really just about how people think and the ways that we think and process the world around us. And I found that academic journey was incredibly helpful for me in my current role. Just with developing a lot of the programs that End Overdose has, where first and foremost, I would say kind of an education organization. We provide education on overdose prevention and response, and developing those different modules, definitely having an understanding of what resources or what things resonate best with people or allow them to think in certain ways has been really helpful. But also when leading other people, especially when leading kind of our chapter members, having this perspective of why people think that the way they do, or why everyone has such a different view on different things, and especially when it comes to substance use, and everyone has such differing opinions, I would say, on how it should be handled or what it should look like or what is problematic substance use versus not. Having this background in psychology and cognitive science has been really helpful for me in navigating those conversations.
I can understand how your background in cognitive psychology is helpful, right? Like you're trying to help people think differently and understand a really, I think, a complex setting. I think navigating substances, understanding substance use is just, it's a hallmark, I think, of being of an age, right? While also having a great amount of autonomy. I come from a higher ed perspective, so I come from like how students develop their own autonomy, how they develop their identity, how they navigate with their peers. So you and I could probably have a really deep conversation just on the interesting brains of 18 to 24-year-olds. But it's great to see that you're taking your STEM background and channeling that towards helping other people. I want to talk a bit about this shift that we're seeing. I've certainly seen it in my background as a safety educator and risk management educator for students, but then also just understanding where Gen Z's at in the culture around substance use. We're just seeing just this kind of evolution, and I don't want to say it's like night and day, but I think it's a little bit louder than we've seen with past generations, and not in a bad way of, what is Gen Z's relationship and kind of the shift in perspective related to substance use and how you're seeing it from your perspective. And I would love to kind of get into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, from studies that I've read currently, like substance use amongst Gen Z is down. Like we're using a lot less substances less frequently than a lot of previous generations. And I think there's a lot of factors at play with that, but I do think that one thing contributing kind of to the perspective that a lot of members of Gen Z have on substance use is the fact that a lot of us have lost people that we know to overdose, and fentanyl overdose, unfortunately, has become such a prevalent thing in modern day that I think it's something that someone knows someone who's been impacted by it if they haven't been impacted by it themselves. And it's just kind of always on the back of like a lot of people's minds when they are using substances, is that there's this greater risk associated with substance use that might not have been there 10 years ago. And I think with growing up around the opioid epidemic, where we saw Oxycontin and other substances being used and prescribed so heavily, I think it really did change a generation's perspective on substances, not only substances that are used recreationally, but also substances that we receive from our doctors, from the pharmacy. So I think that understanding and a lot of the negative impacts that substances have had in terms of overdose and substance use disorder on populations right before ours and our current generation has changed a lot of Gen Z's perspective on substance use. And I think in a lot of instances, like made a lot of people a little bit more cautious about using substances for the first time. Or what we see now with a lot of our college students is that they have people coming up to them who they know what naloxone is, like they've wanted to have it for a while. They just didn't know where to get it. And Overdose is the first time that they're actually getting access to these sorts of resources. So it has been an interesting shift, because I know when I first started the UCLA chapter, we honestly, we had a lot of students who had never heard of naloxone before. Like, it was me explaining it to them for the first time. And sometimes those conversations were really painful, because it was students who had lost friends or family members to overdose, and they had no idea that this overdose like antidote existed in the world. But definitely now I would say there's an even greater shift towards like safe substance use amongst Gen Z, and Gen Z is a lot more, I would say, than other generations willing to provide people who use substances with the resources and the education to keep themselves safe and to keep their community safe. So that's kind of the biggest shift I think I've seen, and the biggest difference I've noticed when I'm training maybe older populations versus people who are part of Gen Z.
Yeah, and I think I hear that loud and clear, of this idea of like, well, it's not worth the risk, right? Of whatever that might be, and some people might look at that and say, well, Gen Z is just like they're being babies about it. And I think what I hear is previous generations, kind of for better or for worse, like we didn't have the information that we do today. And I think it's becoming a very apparent, like, you don't know when your last day on this earth is going to be for whatever reason. And Gen Z is not taking that very lightly. They're like, I want to have full control over my destiny and not put that in the hands of other people, or things that I can't control, because like, despite the fact that sometimes I feel like Gen Z has a little bit of nihilism of like, the world's on fire, what does it matter? They also are kind of like, the world's on fire, but I don't want that to mean like my days are over. And so I think that I'm witnessing from what you're sharing and what I see with young people is just a much more empowered approach to understanding substances, their impacts on you, everything from drinking to cannabis use to potentially what would be considered harder drugs. And I think that they're going into it like they do with every other thing that we know that Gen Z has, which is more information. And so they're trying to, like, because they know better, they're trying to do better. And I don't fault them for that. And we're seeing, I keep seeing this, and we've talked about it a lot in this, in this season of this podcast, is Gen Z is getting together and socializing differently, because they want something a little bit more. And that doesn't mean that I think, and you would be the first to be able to tell me, I don't think that means that people aren't going to use substances, but they are going at it with a much more empowered and informed approach. And I think that's actually a good thing, that young people are prepared to do the thing they need to do if they need to step in and do something. So y'all are doing really important work. I would love to talk a little bit more from this public health lens and how you're really in this space of leadership of I'm going to guess that how many years have you been removed from being a graduate in college?
I'm at 2 years now. I'm doing my second year post grad. Yeah.
2 years fresh. So by most standards, that's still pretty young, early in your career, your full-time, what I call your big kid career, right? To have you in a position like a COO, some people don't get there till they're 40, 50. You're doing it 2 years post grad. So first, pat yourself on the back. But I think that speaks to a lot of the importance of young people being at the table when we're trying to address issues. Talk to me about how, you've stepped into this space for a national nonprofit, and you're bringing your Gen Z lens to the leadership that you have in the role of, COO, not a small role to have. Walk me through a little bit of that, of your Gen Z lens into how you're leading in that space.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my favorite parts about Gen Z is that we are so information hungry. I think that's a huge part of our generation, is we've had access to the internet and all of this information at the tip of our fingers our whole lives. And we really do utilize that, I think, more than any other generation does. And I like to think of myself as an avid learner. And I think in my career currently, I'm still learning a lot. But kind of stepping into this role, it was really exciting, because a lot of the work that Overdose does is with younger populations. Our kind of target age demographic is high schoolers all the way through mid 20s to like early 30s. And it's a notoriously hard age range to reach with public health campaigns, and to reach, period, with any messaging. Even companies struggle a lot to market towards young adults. And I think Gen Z is kind of really has a great radar for detecting when something is created just for them by people who aren't part of their generation, or by people who don't really understand them. So I do love that End Overdose is so youth focused. And because we know that our target demographic is young people, we utilize a lot of young people in developing our programs and implementing our programs. And I think that that's so important to the work that we do, and really why we resonate so much with this younger generation is that our organization is able to take those voices and have people recognize themselves and like the people who are conducting outreach to them. When we go to music festivals and do trainings, I'm usually with a team of young adults and college students who are super passionate about End Overdose. But for the attendees at those music festivals, like they're reaching out to their peers, like they're walking up to our booth and they're seeing themselves and the people who are training them. And I think that it really is where the power of our organization lies, is the fact that we are so youth centered. And yeah, I think going now to a lot of different public health conferences and getting to learn more from like public health professionals about kind of the work that I'm doing has been incredibly impactful. But really what I've realized is that young people, especially now in this modern age where we're so incredibly connected with our phones and social media, is that we really are huge change makers. And I think that's what I kind of try to impart on all of our chapter members is you as individuals, even if you only do outreach to 10 people, like those 10 people are going to tell 20 people, and it's just going to grow and grow and grow from there. And that's really what I saw when I was starting the UCLA chapter, was that us as young people, we have so much power to enact change on our campuses or in our communities. And moving into my full-time role with End Overdose, I think I really carried that with me. I think I suffered a lot like early in college with imposter syndrome and not really being in the right place or being in too high of a position or taking on too much at once. But now in my current role, like I really do feel like this is where I'm meant to be. And a lot of days are difficult, but they're so incredibly rewarding. And honestly, a lot of the time I feel like I know what to do. And I think that's what I try to tell our chapter members too, is like a lot of the time, like you do know what to do, like you just haven't been given the space before to actually do that and to take charge and be a leader for the first time. So being given this space by my boss, Theo, is I feel incredibly fortunate. My friends always kind of joke that I'm a natural born leader, and I very much struggle to not be the one in charge of things. So I was really, really happy to step into this role with End Overdose and help lead the organization. But I think that we all have it within us, and I think a lot of our chapter members would be more than capable of taking on larger roles within the organization or within their own communities or to other companies that they're part of, other organizations that they're part of. But I think it really is a matter of like being given that space, and really advocating for your worth and showing people what you can do. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm like sitting here having like a proud older cousin moment, because like that's how I feel about a lot of Gen Z. I'm just like, what can I do to give you space to shine, right? Because they're way smarter than me. They know how to use tools better than me, like in all facets of life. So I'm like, well, what can I do besides cheer you on? And I'm so glad you have someone like Theo in your corner saying like, let me support you, like let me help you be the leader that you can be and that you are. And as someone who was potentially a little tenacious in my early 20s as well, I'll tell you the story just as a let me affirm you of, I had an older man once in one of my very first keynote sessions I ever did. And he goes, not related to your content, but like, where did you get the confidence to like do this? And I said, I don't know. Someone asked me, so I did it. Right. And then I also said, I always do my homework and I always come prepared. So there you go, sir. And like, that was on a stage of like 150 people. And so I think like, if you're feeling imposter syndrome, please don't, because you already are. Right. And like, you do your homework, and that's other people's problems. If they don't think you belong there, that's their problem. You very much still belong where you are. And someone said that you needed to be at the table. So sit there and take your seat, and sit as long as you need to, because you're doing really good work. And I really believe that what you're doing through your work is going to inspire a lot of other young people to want to step into spaces of addressing public health, addressing social issues, addressing things that impact them and their communities. And if I've learned anything about Gen Z, is they not only care about their peers, but they care about people in their community, and we just need to put them in positions to actually be able to maybe do some stuff differently to address some of these problems that have been around for a while. If you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Gen Z. It's the whole dang podcast, right? I want to touch on this idea of what older generations can do. You know, you've got a great mentor in Theo. I'm sure you've worked with other people in older generations that are either really helpful or really not helpful. But what would you like to say to older generations who want to support Gen Z change makers like you and get them into positions of leadership, right? Like, we can't have every single Gen Z in a position of leadership, but we can certainly leverage their leadership strengths. So what would you say to those older generations that want to better engage Gen Z in these kinds of positions and roles?
Yeah, I think that one of the really unique things about Gen Z is that we really are the first generation to grow up with technology in the way that it is now. And I think as much as there's a ton to learn from older generations, I think all of the mentors that I've had throughout my life have been incredibly helpful to me in my journey to this current position. But I do think, especially with technology and the way that we now communicate, that's something that Gen Z is really an expert on, that older generations just can't quite wrap their heads around. And I think use of technology, use of social media, communication through social media, just I honestly, when even speaking with my parents, sometimes I feel like the way I communicate with my friends is such a foreign concept to them because it's so different than how they would have communicated with their friends when they were my age, or how they even communicate with their friends now. But I think giving Gen Z the space to kind of teach you like about things like that. I think technology, social media, communication, those are really strong suits of our generation. And I think we've all kind of been forced to be really, really good communicators because typing and posting on social media is just such a big part of our day-to-day life, and replying to people's comments, like DMing people, like that's all something that we're doing way more frequently than any past generation has. But I really do think that giving people the space to try to be a leader for the first time and walking them through that is so incredibly important. I definitely recommend, like, any Gen Z people who are in college still, like, you get involved with an organization on your campus and you really do try to like take lead and take charge if you're the kind of person who wants to be a leader in your future. I think leading a student organization was incredibly helpful for me and gave me a lot of skills in terms of communicating with other members of Gen Z, but also with my school's administration team, who a lot of the time are from older generations, and kind of balancing their wants and needs with my wants and needs. That was a really helpful experience for me, personally, when I was at UCLA. But yeah, I think that in like the working world, definitely giving Gen Zers like the space to grow and develop, and giving them the space to develop skills outside of the classroom is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. The student involvement, student affairs, past life me is like absolutely music to my ears. I think everyone needs to have their thing right on campus, because we also need to have our thing when we leave campus and we go out into this thing called like the real world, I guess. And I put air quotes around that for listeners. The real world, because we need a thing that's not just work. We need a thing that's not just school, that allows us to be connected to people and to a purpose and a passion if it isn't in our work. So sometimes people like you and I are lucky that our passion also happens to be our work. So good for us. Let's think about the future a little bit. I would love to get your thoughts on, your hopes for the future of public health and community advocacy, especially as we continue to think about issues that are especially pertinent to young adults today and youth today. But what gives you hope for the future of public health in this space that you work in within Overdose?
Yeah, I always say after pretty much any end overdose event I go to where volunteers are present, that my faith in humanity is like restored after I leave. Getting to work with so many people who are passionate about something is so incredibly heartwarming. And one of my favorite parts about End Overdose is that a lot of us are united under this cause of preventing overdose, but we all have very different viewpoints on other things in our lives, and maybe don't agree on other topics, but we're all able to work together and very cohesively because we're so passionate about preventing and responding to overdoses and educating other people on how to do the same. And every time I attend a volunteer event, I like leave like smiling and glowing and like so happy, just because getting to interact with young people who care so much about this cause, and are really willing to like put aside time on their busy weekends when they are actively in school or actively working, to dedicate time to our mission is just so incredibly like beautiful to me, honestly. And it really is wonderful to see. And I think also kind of entering this community of end overdose has been so healing, for me in a lot of ways, because everyone has been impacted in some way or another by substance use or overdose, and seeing people really put sometimes like that pain, that extreme pain that you have from grieving towards their passion and towards helping other people is really just a wonderful thing to see. But I think I mentioned this already, but what I tell our chapter members a lot and what I say a lot when I speak at conferences is that us as individuals have so much more power than we realize to change the behavior and the attitudes of the people around us. And really starting with the UCLA chapter, that was kind of the first time I realized my power as an individual to enact that change for other people. And now I'm definitely doing it on kind of a larger scale than I was. But even one-on-one conversations I had with my peers when I was an undergrad at UCLA, really showed me that like a lot of people just want the space to be willing to have open conversations and learn more about something without fear of like you judging them for not knowing enough about the topic already. So I have a lot of faith, honestly, that the future will be better and brighter, because I think that a lot of members of Gen Z are so focused on identifying problems and figuring out solutions to them. And also we're very loud. Like we're very loud on social media. We're very loud in person. Like I think Gen Z's really done an incredible job, a lot of members of this generation, of speaking our passions into existence and advocating for them with other people. And that's just always such a positive, wonderful, heartwarming thing to see. And every time I go to a conference and I see another young person, I'm like so ecstatic. And even when they're not doing the same work as me, I'm so excited to hear about what they're doing. And I feel like every member of Gen Z who I talk to about what they're doing, like you can hear the passion in their voice, and you have to like cut them off. Like they'll keep talking about it forever. And I think that that's such a beautiful and wonderful thing. And it's been really cool to see. And it has given me a lot of faith for the future of the world and society.
Yeah, I can't cut them off when they start talking about things they love, right? And I'm like, well, thank you for one, not being on your phone, right? Like, so like we're right here. But I like I agree, when you get a Gen Z like really fired up about a thing they care about, I'm like, don't stop them. Like, let them get it all out. It's so important. But I love what gives you hope is like the power of individuals and how that grows. And we've been keeping an eye on this, like through our research of like it's kind of like what I call like the evolution of grassroots, or the evolution of the word of mouth. Is it's different for Gen Z, but it's the most potent and powerful. So it's the thing that, Maddie might share it with her best friend, but her best friend's going to share it with their other friend, and their other friend's going to share it with their roommate, and so on and so forth. And so, you identified it might just be 10 people in this chapter, but those 10 people are going to go influence 5 other more people. And you're growing that network. And I think the ability to manage those networks for things like public health issues and community advocacy among Gen Z is going to be really powerful. But again, we have to open up spaces to position young people to be a part of the problem solving. And if I know anything about Gen Z, they politely point out the problem and they want to be a part of the solution. It's not just like complaining to complain. And sometimes older generations hear it and they're like, no, they're just young people complaining. I was like, no, they're identifying an issue. Like, let's bring them in and see what they can do. And I think one of my biggest qualms is older generations will be like, but they're just pointing out all the problems. And I said, yeah, and what did you do to try to like help them find the solution? They're like, well, we created this policy and this program. I said, but did you talk to anyone like from that population of people to make sure that it resonated with them? Or did you bring them in at any point to get their viewpoint and understand how this would or would not work with them? And I think that's the biggest mistake that most older generations make with trying to engage Gen Z or any younger generation.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that.
You're like, yeah, I live it every day of my life. Well, Maddie, I learned so much both about leadership, about some great work that we can be doing to support healthier substance use and prevention and addressing overdose, which I pray that no one really ever has to deal with, right? But we want people to be prepared that if they do need to, how they can support one another. And that's a huge credit to the work that you do with End Overdose. But I got to ask my final question. It's kind of like the exit ticket. Getting off this subway, you got to pay the toll. What's your favorite thing about your Gen Z peers?
That's a hard question. I would say my favorite thing is honestly how connected we are. I think there's a lot of negative parts of social media, and I don't want to discount that, but I think that it's so incredibly wonderful that our generation versus others, like we can stay connected to each other our entire lives. And I was talking to my mom about this recently because she was saying how difficult it was for her to stay in contact with a lot of her peers from college after they graduated, just because there wasn't anything like social media. And I feel like it is easier now than ever to stay connected with people your entire life, to keep up with people's lives, to see what's going on with other people. And I love that like so much. Like I love seeing what other people are doing on my Instagram feed. I love being able to text my friends and know what they were up to the weekend before. And I love like these constant reminders of all of these connections that I've had throughout my life. Like I love scrolling through my Instagram feed and being like, oh, I met her like 3 years ago. I met them like 2 years ago. That's like my best friend. Like I love that so much. And I think that online and in person, like connection is just so important to Gen Z, and finding really powerful, impactful moments to connect has become something that's so valuable to us. I also feel like we've gotten more creative and like in-person connections, because we're like, we can't just sit and talk. It's like we could do that on our phones. Like we need to do something exciting. Like we need to get outside. We need to go to a festival. We need to do something. So yeah, definitely that. I would say how connected our generation is to each other.
I appreciate that take, because there's a lot of people that say that Gen Z is really lonely, and they're like, and I was like, I don't know. I feel like they're always talking to their friends. I don't really care how they're talking to their friends, as long as they've got somebody to talk to, right? Like we all need our person. And I think I align a little bit with some of that. Like some of my best friends, most of my best friends they're long distance. And so that's all I got, because I can't be flying to see them every weekend. I make good money, but I don't make that good of money. And timing is hard. So, in some ways, I think I've emulated a little bit of Gen Z in me and that. But I'm thankful, because I think that there's so much we can learn from young people, and Gen Z is so willing to share that. It's one of my favorite things is they are not scared to share their opinions, information, resources. They are, as the kids say, they're not gatekeeping, not gatekeeping anything. Well, Maddie, it's been wonderful to spend time with you, to learn about the really important work that you're doing. If people want to stay connected with you and the work that's being done with End Overdose, where can we send people? And we'll make sure we include this in the show notes. But where can people connect with you to follow along with your work and the great work that End Overdose is doing?
Yeah, so you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. My username is it's Maddie Ward, ITS Maddie Ward. And then our End Overdose social media pages, we're on pretty much every platform. Our username on most platforms is @end_overdose.
Wonderful. Well, Maddie, thank you again for being here and sharing really wonderful insights with us today.
Hey, everybody, I'm Lori Rudiman. What are you doing? Working? Nah, you're listening to a podcast about work, and that barely counts. So while you're at it, check out my show, Punk Rock HR, now on the Work Defined Network. We chat with smart people about work, power, politics, and money. Are we succeeding? Are we fixing work? Probably not. Work still sucks, but tune in for some fun, a little nonsense, and a fresh take on how to fix work once and for all.
What an inspiring and eye-opening conversation with Maddie. There's so much we can take from Maddie's story, warmth, and passion for making safer experiences for others. but let's highlight a few of the biggest takeaways that I think we can all carry into our lives and our communities. First, peer-to-peer education saves lives. Maddie reminded us that people, especially young people, are far more open to learning about tough topics like substance use when it comes from their peers. If you're on a campus, in a workplace, or even in your own friend group, remember, your voice has power. Sharing resources like naloxone or simply starting the conversation could make all the difference. 2, knowledge reduces fear. Gen Z is showing us that substance use prevention isn't about scare tactics. They want access to real information and real tools. Whether you're a student, parent, or educator, consider how you can approach these conversations with openness, clarity, and empathy rather than judgment. 3, leadership starts with taking space. Maddie talked about her own journey through imposter syndrome and how transformative it was when mentors gave her room to lead. That's a good reminder for us all. We don't have to wait for permission to step up. But if you are in a position of influence, look for ways to create space for others as well. 4, community is a multiplier. From UCLA to over 60 chapters nationwide, Maddie's story shows how one small effort can ripple into something much larger. Don't estimate the power of starting with a few people in your circle. That impact is going to grow faster than you might think. And 5, there's hope in the doing. Despite the heaviness of the overdose crisis, Maddie left us with a message of hope that each of us, by being informed and connected, can play a role in saving lives and shaping healthier communities. So as you head back to your day, I want to invite you to ask yourself, where can I use my own influence, whether in my friend group, workplace, or community, to share knowledge, create space, and make someone safer? Thank you again to Maddie for spending time with me to talk about such an important topic. If you want to stay up to date with End Overdose's work, head over to Instagram and find them at @overdose. And you can also find Maddie on Instagram at It's Maddie Ward. We'll be sure to link both of those profiles in the show notes. And of course, thank you for tuning in. We always hope that you walk away from each episode feeling more informed and more empowered. Now, we'd love to hear about it. So what stuck with you, and what are you going to keep thinking about after this episode ends? You can share about it on Spotify in the listener comment section, or you can follow, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. That action really does help more people find these conversations and hang out with us. The 2025 season is somehow almost over. We only have a few more episodes left before we wrap up for the year. However, we're always looking for new topics and insightful guests to feature. If you have a suggestion, head over to my website and fill out the form. You can find that at meghanmgrace.com/podcast. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Meghan M. Grace, and that's the same name for my profile on Instagram. This episode was made possible by the Gen Z team behind the scenes who help bring these great stories to life. This episode was produced by Callie Waters and edited by Leah Kramer. Thank you again for stopping by, and let's continue this conversation. We'll chat soon.